Be sure to subscribe and click on the bell for notifications on future uploads. Hello everyone, Someone Bard here, or you can call me Sully. Well, it's time for me to review another batch of movies that I saw in theaters, but this one is going to be of movies that I saw in September 2022. And there are 6 of them. The first film I'm looking at is one that has a good sense of horror in its setup, but flounders as it moves along. You'll soon see. Barbarian. Director Zach Krieger has made a horror movie that I have no idea what to make of. It has okay characters, an interesting story, and neat gore effects, yet how it's presented is bizarre. There's certainly a disturbing implication going on, and it's made clear as the film unravels itself, to which makes the plot of the movie the most horrifying and best part, along with an occasional jump scare, some tense moments, and bloody violence and gore. However, the structure surrounding it is kind of weak. Its core horror elements are effective, and the first half is well done for its setup and fooled me into thinking it will be predictable during that time. But after that, there's elements of comedy making it feel like an entirely different movie, which only gave me like one chuckle, a flashback which is very understandable and needed, and then back to the horror where everything's explained and I got why the first half and flashback are there. But on top of that, there's a couple of shots that are ridiculous to overlook and I nearly laughed at, some reasonings within make little sense, the humor is rarely funny as the laughs I got were unintentional, it's quite a mess. It is a horror film and it works best when it goes that route with its gore, main setup, and atmosphere. But the detours it has with the comedy, structure, certain shots, and story details end up making the whole film and even experience almost lackluster, and it should have stuck to the greater elements. 2.5 mixed stars. The second film I'm looking at is a murder mystery comedy with a semi-all-star cast that I felt could have been done better. See How They Run. Director Tom George has made an okay murder mystery comedy that has okay characters, an okay story, and yes, okay effects when needed. While I'm all for whodunit stories, especially for how it all ends, this one is almost no exception. And I say almost because this one wasn't quite grabbing me. It's interesting how the setup is, as the director for the film adaptation of Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap is murdered, and an inspector and constable try to solve it together, and the suspects are also seen as victims. Yet it gets slightly boring as it goes, with the downbeat inspector who often drinks, and the constable who often jumps to conclusions, as the film states. Even the edits of there being 2 to 4 shots in a frame and quick cuts doesn't add much. As such, it's an almost fine film that's not too hard to follow and has rare bits of humor that I liked, with one moment I laughed at, but since one of the opening lines is, "You've seen one, you've seen them all," it really speaks more than what the film does. 2.5 mixed stars. This next film is inspired by true events, yet it has a basic story and fine characters, but overall it's alright. The Woman King. Director Gina Preen Braithwaite has made a fine film with alright characters, a fine story, and okay effects when needed. While the film is inspired by true events of a woman warrior tribe called the Dahomey, it's basically a fight for slavery story set in Africa and takes place in 1823, years before the American Civil War. And while that is interesting enough, as well as having decent action and some neat culture, most of its story follows a young woman wanting to be a warrior and has a romance with a Portugal captain who was once part of the African tribe, and Viola Davis as the title role almost becomes the supporting role than the lead. Yet that's not too much of a problem as the film itself is pretty fine. I like the action it has, the sets and costumes are well done, the story is basic but interesting, the music and acting is fine, and it's all not that bad. 2.5+ stars. The next movie is an interesting psychological thriller with a simple premise, despite 1 or 2 issues I have with it. Don't Worry Darling. Director Olivia Wilde has made an interesting movie featuring fine characters, an interesting story, and okay effects when needed. While it's mostly set in the late 50s, early 60s, in a typical suburban town, where men go to work and women stay at home, do chores, relax, and cook, it becomes an okay psychological thriller when one of the women feels and knows something's wrong and tries to find out what's going on while everyone around her thinks she's crazy, while experiencing things that only she can see. While it may seem like a standard plot and I was kind of predicting where it was going, but as it progresses it becomes something I didn't expect. But without giving the ending away, it's been done before, but more simple. However, there are a few moments that are never explained and some things that are answered are bare-boned. But they are adequately fine. There's hardly anything wrong with it, and it does its job okay. Yet, to kind of quote the movie itself, I expected more of it. 2.5 plus stars. This next one, however, is a documentary on the late David Bowie, and while it's unique in its presentation, it sort of overstayed its welcome for me. Moonage Daydream. Director Brett Morgan has made a unique documentary on David Bowie using archival footage and recordings of him through concerts, music videos, interviews, photographs, home movies, and things never seen before like his paintings and world travels. Not to mention many visuals and effects that are quite colorful, creative, and big, including the films David Bowie's been in from Labyrinth to Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Yet, as immense as this film is with all its visuals and edits, and of Bowie himself talking about his life, how he lived it, and even wanting everyone to enjoy and experience life in some way, the entire film comes off and feels more like an experience than a documentary in general. It's effective in some places, but is pretty long at only 2 hours and 20 minutes, and a few times it tends to end only to continue again. So even though I was feeling the film's length, it was alright to see for the visuals and the songs of David Bowie, if for anything else. 2.5 mixed stars. And the last movie I'm looking at is one that has the most frightening images I've seen, but is from one of the dullest movies I've seen as well. Smile. Director Parker Finn has made a terrifyingly effective, yet aggravating film, with okay characters, a lame story, and surprisingly well-made effects. While the film does borrow elements from movies like The Ring, Gothica, and Malignant, and all the scares are highly effective, especially in the final moments, the setup to it is not my cup of tea, where the main lead sees things only they can see and no one believes them, and involving an evil entity that has a non-ending pattern, even to doing things they never remember doing and those close to them never speak to them again. It's a modern horror plot that I never like, and only a few of them did work for me. However, outside of that, and a story detail that's never quite as explored and I feel would have benefited the film a little more, the frights the film gave me are way too much, a little more than It from 2017, with one of the final shots nearly traumatizing me. It's definitely my worst fear in one movie, and I don't think I'll ever see it again, even with my least favorite horror plot. So in summary, I don't like the film as much, but it's very effective. 2.5 mixed stars. And that is it. So thank you for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe. Follow on Facebook or Twitter. Support me on Patreon. And tune in next time for a new video.